Before there were villages, before there were gods, there was the earth, raw, wild, unclaimed. It's hard to imagine a world without borders, without countries, cities, or even names. But step back in time, 300,000 years, and that's exactly where we land. A world where the only law was nature's, and survival was the only currency. The climate was unpredictable. Earth was entering and exiting ice ages. Like clockwork, glaciers surged across continents. Forests expanded, then vanished. Deserts bloomed and died. This was a restless planet, reshaping itself with every passing epoch, and scattered across this unstable world, where our ancestors, not yet quite us, but close. In Africa, vast savannas rolled out under a sun that could kill as easily as it could nurture. Towering elephants roamed beside lions twice the size of today's kings. Giant birds, horned beasts, saber-toothed predators. In some regions, forests grew so dense, sunlight barely touched the floor. In others, open plains stretched so wide, you could walk for days and see no shelter. There were no maps, no guides, only instinct. But our ancestors weren't wandering aimlessly. They were adapting, learning, slowly, painfully. They began to understand the seasons, the migration of animals, the behavior of plants. They didn't just live in the wild, they were of the wild. And in this world, survival meant attention. One wrong step, one overlooked clue, and you might not see the next sunrise. But those who learned, who paid attention, they lived. And they passed their knowledge. On this chapter of human life wasn't written in books. It was written in scars, in bones, in footsteps across mud that hardened into stone. We don't just inherit their DNA, we inherit their resilience. And so, on this chaotic, ever-shifting stage, humanity was about to emerge. So how did we become human? It didn't happen overnight. Evolution is patient, brutal, and full of surprises. And the path from ape to human was anything but a straight line. Our story begins with Homo habilis, often called handyman. Around 2.4 million years ago, this early ancestor started doing something revolutionary, using tools. Sharp flakes of stone, used to cut meat or crack bones for marrow. It may seem simple now, but back then, this was cutting-edge tech. Literally. Then came Homo erectus. Taller, smarter, more efficient. This was the first of our kind to leave Africa, to walk out into the unknown, and never look back. Erectus mastered fire, made better tools, and might have even developed the beginnings of language. They hunted in groups, shared food, and likely cared for their weak. But it was Homo sapiens, us, who would rewrite the rules. We didn't have the biggest brains. Neanderthals, in fact, had larger ones. We weren't the strongest either. But we had something else. Creativity, flexibility, the ability to think abstractly. Imagine, plan ahead, and adapt at lightning speed. And maybe most importantly, we could connect language. Wasn't just grunts anymore. It became something richer. We started to gossip, tell stories, share ideas. Knowledge no longer had to die with the person who discovered it. And here's the thing. Once humans could imagine, everything changed. We could plan hunts, build tools with a future use in mind. Look at a rock and see a blade. Look at the stars and wonder what they meant. Our brains lit up with questions, and that spark, that curiosity, is what made us truly human now. Let's talk about daily life. The gritty, unforgiving reality of survival. Being a hunter-gatherer wasn't a job, it was an existence. There were no off days, no holidays, no retirement. Every dawn brought the same questions. What will we eat? Where will we sleep? Will we be alive tomorrow? Men and women alike scanned the landscape for signs. Fresh tracks in the mud, a broken branch, the scent of an animal on the wind. If they were lucky, they'd find a herd, reindeer, bison, or maybe even mammoths. But hunting was no easy task. Without metal, without wheels, without horses, our ancestors had to get close. They used spears, stone blades, and cunning. Sometimes, they'd work in teams to chase prey toward traps or cliffs. Other times, they'd follow a wounded animal for days, waiting for exhaustion to finish what their weapons couldn't. And gathering, equally vital, the knowledge of which berries were poisonous, which roots were edible, which mushrooms would kill you. It was often carried by women, passed down through generations. Gathering wasn't just foraging, it was science, memory, and intuition, wrapped together. Predators were everywhere. Not just animals, but other humans. Strangers might bring trade or death. The wilderness was beautiful, but indifferent. Illness, too, was constant. A scratch could become infected. A broken bone might mean death. There were no doctors, only experienced in herbal remedies, some effective, some hopeful guesses. Yet, despite this, they endured. Not just as individuals, but as communities. They shared, protected one another, watched the skies and told each other what they saw. Didn't just survive nature. They began to understand it. What did love look like 100,000 years ago? When we think of early humans, we picture hunters with spears, mothers with infants, maybe a small fire and some fur pelts. But behind those images were relationships. Real ones. Humans don't survive well alone. We're social animals. And long before modern civilization, we built families, not just biologically, but emotionally. Anthropologists believe early human groups were small, around 20 to 50 people. Within those bands, bonds ran deep. Adults shared food with children who weren't their own. Elderly were cared for, not cast out. These weren't just survival units. They were proto-societies. Romantic partnerships likely existed, though not in the way we define marriage today. Pair bonds formed, at least temporarily, often centered around child rearing. Fathers were involved. Mothers were essential. But the entire group contributed to raising young, an approach called cooperative breeding. It takes a village. Yet, they invented that. Children played, learned, mimicked adults. Grandparents told stories, taught skills, gave context. These oral traditions may have been the seeds of culture. And then there was grief. Burial sites suggest early humans mourned. Carefully arranged skeletons, flowers laid beside the dead. This wasn't just disposal, it was ritual. They felt loss. They remembered love, play, sorrow, family. Even in the Stone Age, humanity was never just about tools. It was about each other. Fire, the original miracle. We don't know exactly when humans tamed it, but by at least 400,000 years ago, fire was a part of life. Warmth, light, protection, cooked food, longer nights filled with stories, planning, even creativity. Then came tools, and not just basic ones. Hand axes, scrapers, needles, fishhooks. Over time, tools became more complex, more specialized. They weren't just made, they were taught. A shared technology that spanned generations. Eventually, humans began creating composite tools, combining materials like wood, stone, and animal sinew. Think spears with carved tips, bound tightly and made to last. Or bows and arrows, which revolutionized hunting. They also made containers, woven baskets, animal skins, even crude pottery. Why? To store things. That meant planning, predicting the future, thinking ahead, and clothing. Yes, they had it. Animal hides were scraped clean, softened, stitched together using bone needles. In colder regions, wearing layered fur could be the difference between life and death. Invention wasn't about luxury, it was about need. And need drove creativity. But there's something else. Aesthetic sense. Beads, decorations, carvings on tools that didn't need to be beautiful, but were. Why? Because humans have always sought more than just survival. We've always looked for meaning. Now we step into the caves, not to escape the cold, but to enter the mind of early humanity. The walls of places like Lascaux and Chauvet in France, or Altamira in Spain, are covered with stunning images. Bison charging, horses galloping, stags standing proud, painted with ochre, charcoal, and minerals. Some are over 30,000 years old, and yet still vivid. But why paint these? Maybe they were part of rituals, spiritual or shamanic. Maybe they told stories, passed down hunting wisdom. Maybe they were art for art's sake. Whatever the reason, they weren't just doodles. They were language before language, and not just paintings, there were sculptures too. The Venus figurines, small carvings of women, often exaggerated in form, fertility symbols, goddesses, self-portraits. Then there were burials, carefully posed bodies, red ochre, dusted over the bones, grave goods, tools, ornaments, even flowers. This was belief, reverence, connection to something beyond. Humans were starting to see themselves not just as creatures, but as beings. With culture came tradition, identity, a shared past. And with that, humanity grew roots. For a long time, we thought Homo sapiens were alone. We weren't. Across Europe and Asia lived the Neanderthals, stockier, stronger, intelligent cousins, with a rich culture of their own. In Asia, the Denisovans left behind clues of their existence. There were even smaller species, like Homo floresiensis, nicknamed hobbits for their tiny size. And we met them. Not just in battle, but in cooperation, in trade, and in love. Modern DNA carries traces of Neanderthals and Denisovans. That means interbreeding happened. These weren't alien creatures, they were people, too. But then they vanished. Why? Some think climate shifts hit them harder. Others believe competition with sapiens played a role. Or perhaps their small populations couldn't withstand disease or war. We may never know. But what remains is this. We are not a lone species on a throne. We are the last survivors of a much bigger family, and our story is richer because of them. Nature wasn't kind too early. Humans, glaciers came and went. Sea levels rose and fell. Massive volcanic eruptions blotted out the sun for months, even years. One of the most devastating, the Toba eruption around 74,000 years ago, may have triggered a volcanic winter that nearly wiped out Homo sapiens. Genetic studies suggest our numbers shrank drastically. Maybe just a few thousand individuals survived. Imagine that, our entire species, hanging by a thread. And yet, we endured, we migrated, adapted clothing, built shelters, learned to read the skies. In icy times, we followed mammoths and reindeer. In warming periods, we explored new lands. Extinction events loomed everywhere. Saber-toothed cats disappeared. Giant sloths vanished. Even Neanderthals couldn't make it. But we did. Not because we were the toughest, but because we were the most adaptable. We listened, we learned, we changed. Over and over again. Humans are walkers. From the very beginning, we moved. Out of Africa, across deserts, over mountains, through frozen tundras. We didn't just populate the world, we explored it. Around 70,000 years ago, small bands of sapiens began pushing into the Middle East, then Asia, then Europe. Some followed rivers, others coastlines. Land bridges allowed crossings into Australia, and eventually the Americas. Each step brought new challenges, new predators, new climates. But also new opportunities. Tools evolved, clothing adapted, diets changed, and languages diversified. Cultures blossomed, myths were born. Wherever humans went, they didn't just survive, they thrived. And even across continents, we remained connected by the same spark, the need to understand, to connect, to belong. So what do we carry from those early lives? More than we realize. Our bodies are shaped by their challenges, from the curve of our spine to the grip of our hands. Our brains hold instincts. They honed fear of snakes, love for firelight, the desire to tell stories. Even our emotions, grief, joy, wonder, were theirs first. We inherit not just their genes, but their dreams. When we look at cave paintings, we see echoes of ourselves. When we bury our dead, share a story, or look up at the stars in silence, we're doing what they once did. They are not gone. They are within us. Their survival is our existence, and their world was the foundation of ours.